Hello and welcome to the Daily Journal's Capitol View webcast. I am Chris Kiefer, managing editor for multimedia here at the Daily Journal. And each week we are joined by Daily Journal Capitol Bureau Chief Bobby Harrison to talk about the latest in Mississippi politics. Bobby, what's going on in the Capitol today?
Oh, it's quiet down here, Chris. But it is today's the deadline for taxes, so I think we'll probably be talking about taxes some. So I guess that'll be appropriate. But not a happy day for some people.
No, but maybe a happy day for people who got returns, I guess, hopefully.
Yeah.
But
are there people out there like that?
Well, I guess it means that you don't have your form set up right, though. So I guess getting a return is it's kind of a double-edged sword. So anyway, it's nice at the time, though. Bobby, we'll talk taxes, and we'll talk roads and bridges, and I guess we've talked a lot. We talked a lot last week about transportation and still trying to find tax money and different things to be able to replace the roads and bridges in Mississippi. There's a new plan on the table. Tell us what's going on with that.
Well, the speaker, who's probably out front of this issue more than anybody else is, House Speaker Philip Gunn, released a plan last week that was a combination of some of the things that they tried to do during the regular session and some new items. The two primary there are several components of the plan, but the two primary components of the plan were, one, was diverting use tax money as they proposed during the regular session, diverting about a third of the use tax revenue the state collects to the Department of Transportation, take it away from agencies like education, public health, and law enforcement, and divert it to the cities and counties, about $110 million for their road and bridge needs. That was the House proposed that during the regular session. It passed the House but died in the Senate, and that's still part of the plan the Speaker put on the table last week. And the other key element of the plan would be a tax shift, if you will, Chris, where he wants to eliminate the 4% bracket on the state income tax, and which is about $160 million that the state collects in income, in revenue for the state, and eliminate that, but at the same time increase the tax on a gallon of gasoline and diesel fuel by 8 cents. So that'd be just about a even tax shift, or the revenue would be about the same, and what you'd be doing is taking about $160 million in additional money away from education, public health, and law enforcement, all those agencies, and giving that to the Department of Transportation for their road and bridge needs. So and that would be phased in over a 4-year period. That those were the two key components of his proposal. It doesn't appear they're going to go anywhere with at least with Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves, who said he would be for reducing the income tax, but he is not for increasing the gasoline tax. So he kind of looked at it as a non-starter. And Governor Bryant has reiterated that he'd like to have a special session to address the transportation issue, but until there's an agreement between the House and the Senate, he doesn't see any need in having a special session where they would come down here and, I guess, sort of stare at each other without accomplishing much. So there's a lot of talk, but not much action in terms of transportation and the need to spend more money on it.
That sounds familiar, Bobby.
Right. Yeah.
So first of all, Speaker Gunn, how did he release this plan? He called a press conference and said, "Hey, this is the latest attempt of the House on the issue."
Yeah, I don't know. He would. I think. He'd probably view it as immediate availability, but yeah, it was a press conference, and for all, it was sort of sat around a table, talk to him, but it was a press conference, and then he did that. I think it was last Thursday, Chris, on the same day that he presented those proposals to Lieutenant Governor Reeves and Governor Bryant, and then he talked about the proposal again yesterday at the Mississippi State University Stennis Luncheon. The Stennis Institute does this luncheon, and this sort of monthly luncheon in conjunction with the Capitol Press Corps, where they get sort of some of the political leaders come in to answer questions and talk about the issues that confronting the state. So he talked about that again. Speaker Gunn appeared at the Stennis luncheon yesterday and talked about it again. And, Chris, this is all happening against the backdrop. This is not a news story, but it's kind of come to the forefront more. All these local bridges being closed. The governor, declared a state of emergency last week, which resulted in about 100 bridges being closed across the state, local rural bridges. These are sort of timber pile and bit bridges, and they were, the story behind that is that a couple of years ago, federal officials came in and said these bridges need to be inspected, and they inspected, are in the process of inspecting about 1,000 of these bridges, and when they were found to be unsafe, the onus was on the local governments to close the bridges, but in these instances, the local governments were not closing the bridges, so the result was that the governor declared a state of emergency, which allowed the Department of Transportation to close the bridges. And, the federal folks said, if you don't deal with these unsafe bridges, we're going to cut off federal funds. So, that was kind of the stick the federal government held out to force the state to have the bridges closed.
And a lot of those bridges, excuse me, you wrote a little bit more about them this weekend. The fact that there's many of those bridges in Northeast Mississippi. I think there's 542 bridges that are closed across the state now. That's out of 10,700 total bridges, but 542 have been closed, including this latest round. 58 of those are in Northeast Mississippi, and some of the places with a high number of those bridges. Alcorn County, Calhoun County, Tishomingo County each have 8 closed bridges. Prentiss County has 7 closed bridges. So it's clear, and not that anyone's debated that in general, that there is a need for more money, and this is another example of the need for more money. Although I guess on this bridge issue specifically, you wrote about in that story, there was some bond money passed by the legislature that may or may not be available for it.
Yeah, well, there's that's the thing about it. The state spends essentially about $20 million a year to help the local governments with their local bridge needs, and they're still not catching up. There's so many bad bridges in the state, and of course, in 2017 there was a disagreement, and that money was not passed and given to the local governments or given to the agency that provides money to local governments. And this year there was $50 million put in the bond bill for this local bridge program, and that money should be available sometime later on this summer. And so, so hopefully some of these bridges can get fixed, but it's kind of just a continuous process. We have apparently Mississippi has a lot of these timber pilot built, bridges that have the timber in their underpinnings, if you will. I'm no engineer. I'm probably saying this all wrong, but and timber, over a period of time doesn't hold up well, and so these bridges have to be replaced, and they're very, when you start talking about replacing or fixing one of these bridges, I think the average cost, I believe I had this in my weekend story, is about $250,000. And of course, some of those bridges cost a lot more than $250,000 to fix. That's just the average cost.
Sure. And so there's that. So as you said, kind of in the backdrop of all of this, there's that issue of these closed bridges, and of course that affects transportation, that affects commerce, affects businesses, depending on where the bridges are and what the alternate routes are, and so forth. So there's this plan, as we said, by Speaker Gunn. You've already said, I want to kind of get back to it in a minute. Tate Reeves doesn't seem to be, or is not in agreement with the plan, and so it may be a moot point. But your story yesterday from the Stennis Institute mentioned that there are some prominent conservative groups that do support Gunn's plan. Kind of what is it that they like about this plan?
Well,
who is it?
Well, it's the Tax Foundation and the do you have Americans for Prosperity?
That sounds right. Yep, that's it.
Yeah. Which two very prominent conservative groups, national groups that and what they like about the plan, these groups, and sort of I'm speaking in general terms, a lot of Republican-leaning people prefer a use tax to generate revenue for government opposed to the income tax. And so of course the Gunn's plan would increase the the gas tax, which is a use tax, and cut significantly the state income tax. So these groups and Republicans in general like that concept. But the flip side of that is there's a lot of people who would argue that that the a use tax is a more regressive tax that depends that puts a larger burden on the larger tax burden on the on poor people. And the easiest way to describe that, I guess, was you got two people going to work every day, driving about the same distance. They both got to get to work, and one of them is a corporate CEO making $500,000 a year, and the other one is is working at a fast food restaurant, and they're both driving about the same distance. And so but it's going to cost it's going to eat up significantly more of the fast food workers' income to get to work than it is the corporate CEO. Some people see that as unfair, other people don't. I mean, but it's I think you'd have to argue at least it would be regressive to that tax shift would be a regressive tax, not a progressive tax, as they say. And some people think in this a state like Mississippi, which poor state in the nation, that putting more of a tax burden on the poorest of the state citizens is not the right way to go. But the speaker points out that he argues that the use tax, more people would be paying that. There are some people that don't pay an income tax, and there's people that don't like the fact that some people don't pay income taxes, so they want to get the tax revenue from those people in a different way, and so the use tax would do that.
So again, you mentioned there being some conservative groups that are in favor of this proposal, or in favor of the philosophy behind this proposal. Why is Tate Reeves not in favor of it, and kind of where is his thought process, and kind of what is he looking for?
Well, I mean, he hadn't really gone into detail, but I think there's just a lot of people that don't like the notion of I think across the board there's a lot of people that just don't like the notion of increasing the gasoline tax. Gasoline's I mean, most of us already feel gasoline is too expensive, and it appears it's going up right now. At least it has been over the past several months, and I've seen some studies showing it's going to continue to rise, the cost of a gallon of gasoline. And so maybe Tate Reeves, as a lieutenant governor and the governor's mansion, don't want to be on board as increasing the gasoline tax, because that's something we all see when we go to the the general public probably notices the price of gasoline more than they notice any other commodities, you will, because they stand at the pump, pump their gasoline, and they see that price staring right at them, and and then you think about how much of that cost is a tax, and I think that just turns some people off. Now, the lieutenant governor did say he was against increasing the gasoline tax, but he does favor reducing the income tax. Now, and that's all well and good, but that doesn't do
more money.
That doesn't do anything to help with the transportation issue. And Chris, it's so important, I think, to for better or for worse. I just think it's important for people to understand that all these plans, the plan the speaker's talking about, the plan the lieutenant governor's put on the table during the session, all these plans, they don't depend on new revenue. They shift revenue, whether it's the use tax or this tax shift the speaker's talking about. They do the same thing. They shift revenue from education, public health. I keep on saying that phrase, law enforcement, other state agencies. It shifts money from those agencies to transportation. That's just about a general consensus that transportation needs more money, but there's almost a general consensus that most of these agencies have been cut because of sluggish revenue collections over the past several years, and these agencies been cut, and there's a question whether they can sustain more cuts, especially in light of the fact that tax cuts are already going to in effect over the next several years. It's going to reduce money for those agencies already. So the speaker's plan, lieutenant governor's plan, would further reduce the amount of money going to those plans, going to those agencies.
And I guess there was another plan that was outlined last week that you also wrote about, which is legislative Democrats had their own plan for how to address the transportation needs. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, well, that's an important point. The legislative Democrats met last week after Friday after the Speaker released his plan. And while I don't know if this is the official position of the legislative Democratic caucus, I don't know. The story about Mark Twain and talked about Democrats not being organized. Maybe they're not as organized on this either. But several of the Democrats have proposed a repeal or at least a slowdown in the implementation of the 2016 tax cut that went to corporations and also was a tax cut on personal income. This is being phased in, as I referenced that a second ago. This is being phased in over the next 8-9 years, and it's going to be when it's fully implemented, it would be like a $415 million hit to the state general fund coffers. So, so several Democrats are saying, let's stop this tax cut and direct this money toward transportation. So, and because they made the argument that a lot of this money is going to corporations, and there's been some studies done showing that about 80% of the corporations getting the biggest tax cuts are out-of-state corporations. So they say, let's instead of sending that money to out-of-state corporations, let's spend it on the roads and bridges.
Sure. So I know we ask this every week. I mean, now what happens now? The Tate Reeves in his comments last week said he's hopeful that an agreement can be reached. Philip Gunn has said, he's hopeful that an agreement can be reached and a special session's called. But I guess it seems like every time that there's a new plan, Reeves doesn't like Gunn's plan, Gunn doesn't like Reeves' plan. Can a solution be reached? Well, is there any common ground left out there? And where do you think we go from here?
Well, the Lieutenant Governor keeps on stressing they were close in the regular session to reaching an agreement, but they didn't reach that agreement. And at this point, I'm just going to be surprised that they have an agreement that they can that the governor will call a special session to address. But, hey, I've been wrong before, so I might be wrong this time too. But, it doesn't look at this point, it doesn't look like that special session is on the horizon, though.
Well, moving on to another issue that you wrote about early this week, there have been a couple of bills passed in the last legislative session to try to reduce recidivism. I guess people returning to jail, and I guess particularly part of the criminal justice reform to prevent people from having to go to jail simply because of inability to pay fines and various things like that. Walk us through that and some of those efforts.
Well, there was a bill signed, passed this year and signed by the governor earlier that will do. I mean, some people refer to it as debtor's prison. Some people just they make a mistake. You can argue they should have known better and not made that mistake. But a lot of times when somebody makes that first mistake, if they don't have the money to pay the fines and fees, they just seem to get in a deeper and deeper hole, and they spend money. They spend time in jail and can't make money to pay the fines and fees. There's programs in jails and prisons where they can work off the fines and fees, but that doesn't always work out, and especially when somebody can be out working and paying those fines and fees off at a slower rate. So this would say that if somebody was proven to be indigent, that they couldn't just be thrown in jail for not being able to pay their fines and fees. And it also has a component in it, Chris, or if somebody who's in the system on parole or probation, and they got a job, and this allows them to check in with their probation officer or parole officer or whatnot while at work through Skype or some other computer technology. So that was some of the components of that bill. And there's another bill that is waiting the governor's signature that would prevent people from losing their driver's license for having the mandatory prevent it from being mandatory that people lose their driver's license for some drug offenses and some other and for not being able to pay fines and fees, as long as those drug offenses did not entail driving under the influence. I mean, it wouldn't do that. But there's some arguments made that people lose their driver's license, they can't get to work, and then they just the hole just gets deeper and deeper for them, and at some point they just kind of give up and don't see a way out, and then make further mistakes. So make additional mistakes. So these bills are kind of aimed at addressing those situations.
Bobby, I want to ask you, that second bill, that was the one that was vetoed yesterday. Is that right?
Was it?
Yeah,
okay.
There was a bill that was vetoed, and I believe it was that one. And so, yeah, I was going to ask you, maybe you haven't looked into it yet.
No, I have not.
I guess it won't get overridden necessarily anytime soon. Where that effort
probably won't be overridden. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember exactly what I saw. I think that it was the governor. It would have had something where it gave the Department of Corrections some flexibility in determining, or it would have taken away some flexibility. Apparently, they have some flexibility in determining fines, whether or not those fines can be waived. And I think it would have said anybody under the poverty level, those fines are waived. And Governor Bryant said that would have been too big of a hit to the system working as it is, and it would have cost the Department of Corrections a lot of money, I think.
Okay.
I remember seeing. So
there you go.
Anyway, so you mentioned, so first of all, the first bill, and it was signed, as you said, as you wrote it, it was a bipartisan a group that supported it, right?
Yeah, you had conservative groups like we mentioned a while ago, Americans for Prosperity, and then the ACL, American Civil Liberties Union. They both were in support of this bill. So it was it was a Democratic and Republican legislators. So it was a bipartisan effort.
Sure. This kind of comes on the wings of the 2014, as you wrote, that there was a lot of criminal justice reform then. These bills, were there other efforts that maybe started this session that didn't make it all the way through, or other things that you kind of see on the horizon or hearing some talk about on this in this front?
Well, the big thing, and that's kind of becoming a national thing that is and they're really, I mean, that some states are contemplating, it's just sort of the bail system. There's some thought that in a lot of cases bail is not needed. That bail is designed to prevent people from fleeing, and in a lot of cases, it's pretty obvious that the people aren't going to flee. Yet if they can't, it's somebody who's wealthy can pay bail to get out of jail awaiting their trial, and in a lot of instances poor people can't. So some people see that as sort of an unfair setup, and so you hear talk about that. I think we're, as a state, are far away from doing anything about that, but that's kind of becoming a national issue.
Sure. One more issue, Bobby, before we wrap up. You covered a meeting last week of the Mississippi Economic Council. And I guess it seems like the main emphasis of that was trying to promote more skills-based training rather than just kind of funneling everyone through a 4-year degree. Tell us kind of about that effort.
Well, I mean, that's just been ongoing for, you hear talk about that. I mean, you probably heard talk about it for 5-10 years. And of course, there's talk that there's, if you go to the state web pages, the Employment Security Commission, you can find, I think there's 40,000 unfilled jobs, but the jobs are unfilled just because they require skills, whether it's people that can fix air conditioners and heating units, or electricians or welders. There's a lot of jobs out there. There's talk and to try to match people into the available jobs instead of having such emphasis on going to college and getting a 4-year degree and becoming a journalist or attorney or whatnot.
Sure. There was a bill this past session that the governor kind of pushed for that would have, help me remember the details, Bobby. It would have provided some free community college for people in certain skills-based jobs, but it did not pass, right?
No, the revenue got tight, and it would have provided sort of free schooling, if you will, for some of those high skilled high demand jobs. But I think the governor had asked for, I believe it was $8 to $10 million, but revenue got tied, and it kind of died there at the end of the process.
Sure. So that may be something, excuse me, to keep following in the future.
Yeah.
Well, that does it for another episode of Capitol View. As always, we remind you can catch us each week at djournal.com live. We try to be Monday afternoon at 2, sometimes Tuesday afternoon at 2. Follow us on Twitter at djournalnow for the latest on when to find us. And then we're always still there in the video gallery at djournal.com or on our Facebook page. So thanks again to everyone. Bobby, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week.